Hey everyone, and welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to talk about the books that I have read so far in August. I'm actually filming this maybe a bit prematurely. It's about 4 days until the middle of August, but I'm just going to film it anyway. I don't know if I'll finish the book that I'm currently reading by the middle of August, but I won't have time to film, so let's jump into this. So far in August I have completed 3 books and I have finished 1 poetry collection. 3 of those books have been on the Kindle and 1 has been a physical format, and I'm going to speak about the first one, which is City of Girls by Elizabeth Gilbert. I was really excited to get my hands on this. I actually wished for it on Goodreads and was able to get an advanced reader's copy of it, so that was cool. Elizabeth Gilbert is the lady that wrote Eat, Pray, Love, and then she wrote Big Magic, which I really like. She has written a couple of other stuff that I haven't picked up yet, but City of Girls is a book about our main character Vivian, who talks about, I guess, her sexual freedom and her sexual escapades when she was about 19 to about, God, the age that she decides to stop doing that. And she's recounting this in a letter to someone who has asked her how she knows someone. Wow, that just sounds so confusing. Essentially, Elizabeth Gilbert wrote this book because she wanted to write a book about women experiencing fun, sexual freedom, without it being a case of them being vilified for it in the end. So this book is very much that. It was set, I want to say the 1920s, but I feel like it's not. It's probably about the 1940s because it contains the World War. So yes, that must be right. But Vivian is from some town in America. American towns will always confuse me, but she ends up going to New York to stay with her aunt. Her aunt runs a theatre company. She ends up being a costume maker for the company. It's made really obvious straight away to the reader that she sews her own clothes. It's something that was passed down to her from her grandma. But during the nights, it's just her going out with one of the girls that she's clearly in awe of, and them getting hammered, them trying drugs, a lot of sexual freedom. There's a talk of her losing her virginity in this book. It's a wild, tamed book, if I was to describe it, because it talks about these sort of escapades that they have, but it never really goes into detail. It's more covered within a series of paragraphs saying, you know, we went here, we did this, like we used to go here and we used to do this, sorry. So it's very much covered in the past, and it's never put in the present that, you know, she's experiencing this one thing. The only sort of escapade that's ever talked about is the initial one of losing her virginity. But she seems to be having a whale of a time, and then an incident happens that forces her to return home and really makes her sort of think about herself and her life. And it's really interesting to see, because I guess this is the part that Elizabeth Gilbert really wanted to show, the sort of, you know, shaming women for their sexual freedom, and how that makes that woman feel, and sort of, I guess, the life or the path that they can choose to go on after that. Anyway, all ends up fine for our main protagonist. She is able to return to New York at some point, but then the war breaks out, and she talks about the change in New York after the war breaks out, and what life was like for her after that, how she still continued on her sexual escapades. Again, it's very much glossed over, but it's still very interesting. It's interesting, it's witty, it's funny. The characters that she hangs around with have so much personality that it's just a fantastic book to read. All of this is recounted through letters to this one person. It's one huge letter, and you don't sort of find out until the end who the person she's writing to really is, and why she's taking the time to explain the story. I thought it was a really enjoyable read. I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. I didn't actually know if I wanted more from it, but I thought it would be much more explicit in its sexual content. So clearly I was just, you know, there for all the sexual content, but I thought it was a really good book. It was really witty, it was really funny, and the things that the character realised about herself, and I guess her privilege and the life she lived, to me sounded like a real person. It sounded like someone who could sort of look at their life and learn lessons, and it wasn't just constantly a really privileged girl who wasn't able to understand why these things were happening to her in life. I just think overall it's a really wholesome book. It's not a book that's going to completely blow you away, but I liked what Elizabeth Gilbert set out to do, and I think she did achieve that, whereas I wanted more sexual content maybe, and it didn't have that. I didn't think it was a bad book for not having that at all. The next book I'm going to speak about is Sleeping Giants. Sleeping Giants is a trilogy, and it is by Sylvain Neuvel. The reason I'm looking over here is because I have the 3rd book here. Is that the back of it? Yes, it is. I have the 3rd book here, so I was just trying to read his name. And Sleeping Giants is a fascinating book. I started reading this when I was on holiday, and I swear like a day later I had finished it because I was just going through it like, this is amazing, this is amazing. Basic premise of Sleeping Giants is we start with our sort of main protagonist, Dr. Rose. Actually, it's worth bearing in mind that this book is told through a series of like log reports, personnel files and those sorts of things. So although you do get speech, it's very much told in the format of that speech has been recorded and now it's been written down. So yes, that's the beginning. We sort of have our main protagonist, Dr. Rose Franklin, who is a scientist, well she's a physicist, and when she's younger she falls into a huge massive hand, and then it just so happens that later in her life she is back researching this hand, and essentially what begins to happen is this hand is part of a huge ass robot, and they go on this search to piece this robot together and try and understand what is happening. And that is basically what the first book does, because obviously then the second book and the third book takes you through a different journey. What we have though are other really interesting characters. So we have this unknown character who is there, who has sort of assembled this team to sort of find out what this hand is and what this hand is doing. And then when they start finding the bigger parts, he, you know, is charged with keeping this whole thing on track. Like all good scientists, Rose is obviously really cautious about the fact that she doesn't know what it is she's building and whether or not this will be something that is a force for good or a force for evil. But anyway, she's assigned a team of like pilots. There's Cara, there's Vincent, there's, I want to say Michael. I want to say that. And together these people sort of work to make this robot come to life. I think because the author knew there was going to be a part 2 and a 3. Not much happens in the first book. They piece together this huge robot and then they have to try and determine where on earth it came from and what is happening. Meanwhile, you're having sort of our interviewer, our mysterious character who is sort of asking all these questions, proposing the craziest things to be done to people, and you're just sat here like, who is this man and like where has he come from and why is he allowed to do these things and no one is saying anything. So there are loads of little mysteries going on. And I will say the one thing I liked about this book that has started to sort of dwindle in the second book is the fact that because it's told through these case logs and these case files, it's very much detached from the characters and their feelings and their emotions. So I really like that, because then you get to find out what is happening. So that is book 1. The second book in this series is called Awaking Gods, and this is where I guess the action really starts to ramp up. So in this book, and just at the end of the last book, they have assembled this robot together and they've called her Themis, I don't know, something to do with a Greek god. I'm pretty sure that's what it is. And this book takes place about 9 years after the end of the last book. So now, what has happened to the world is sort of, they've realised the capabilities and the power of this robot, and of course, why wouldn't people want to use this power for terrible things, to get people to agree to the things they want? But what starts happening, and which they're really bloody confused about, is robots start touching down on Earth. They just start appearing into different parts of the world. So I think the first appearance of the robot is in Regent's Park in London. Whilst you would think people would be scared of the robot, what has happened in the 9 years that we have been away from the book, people have become acclimatized to the robot Themis. It has been a property of the United States of America, and it has been seen as a friendly robot. So people do not fear the robot. Of course, the arrival of this robot doesn't signal good things, and eventually the human race finds out that these robots are not on their side. Or are they? There's so much mystery and confusion is going on. But what ends up happening in this book is you see one robot appear out of nowhere, then all around the world robots start appearing, and bad things start happening. What I will say about this book is it started to do the things that I didn't want it to do. It started to bring in love interest and emotion, and it sounds like I'm a cold-hearted person, but I don't mind it in books, and I didn't mind how it was sort of developing in the first book, but now it's come very much to the forefront, and I just don't think the book needed it. It doesn't need to have these grand declarations of love. I don't really care. I think if you're someone who's lived on Earth for long enough, you're very aware of what love means to people, what it does. So I was just a bit like, I don't need this. The robot element in this doesn't throw me off, because I can for some reason understand and see and imagine building a big ass fucking robot. Like I really can, and this robot is massive. I'm not sure about the science factors in here. I don't know. I count myself as a very new science fiction reader, but this book is brilliant because I don't know what it is about it. The pacing is perfect in terms of sort of how they're building the robot together, the action that's happening, the different problems that they're facing. Everything is perfectly placed. I never sort of read bits of it and think, oh, that's just too cliched. So I am thoroughly enjoying this series, so I'm going to finish the third one and then probably do a full video, like book review on the series. The final book that I finished is this, which is a poetry collection by Liz Berry, and it's called The Republic of Motherhood. I just want to first start by saying what a beautiful title, what a beautiful little collection with the gold. And I love this quote, which is from the first poem, which is called The Republic of Motherhood, and it's on the back, and it says, "I crossed the border into the Republic of Motherhood. I found it a queendom, a wild queendom." I think I picked this book up because Jan Campbell mentioned it. I'm not too sure, but I'm not pregnant, so that's not why I'm reading a book that says the Republic of Motherhood. I just wanted to expand my poetry reading. So this poetry collection is about motherhood. It's about being pregnant, giving birth, what life is like after you give birth, and this is all very metaphorical, but what a stunning collection of poetry and such a vivid and sometimes dark description of, I guess, what pregnancy is like and how someone might feel. The Republic of Motherhood, which is the first poem, from what I understood, is sort of after she's given birth, maybe she has some like issues or something like that, and I think maybe returns to the doctor or to the hospital in terms of how she's feeling, so it might be postpartum depression. But she talks about the sort of, I guess, new world that she's entered. Like she says here, "I stood with my sisters in the queues of motherhood, the weighing clinic, the supermarket, waiting for its bureaucracies to open their doors." Essentially, Liz manages to capture what I assume is the loneliness and the pain and the heartbreak of giving birth, and I guess the things that you are not meant to feel, or you're not that you're told not to feel, but things that people don't speak about. And she's managed to put these words to paper and talk about them so frankly, and also so darkly that, you know, these metaphors just sort of sit in your head. Like, they sit in my head and I'm sat here like conjuring up loads of different images, because that is what this book does. So that is me done talking about the books that I've read so far in August. I'm definitely going to finish off reading the Themis Files. This is what this is called, so this will be number 3, but it's called Only Human. I will see you in my next video. I know I haven't filmed the rest of my July wrap up. I will film that at some point, so yeah, stay tuned for that. But yes, I will catch you in another video. Bye.